is we've tried to put together a panel discussion that's of value to the entrepreneurs. See if we could add some value to the experience. And so last cycle what we did was a panel with the VCs and to tell people about sort of what they should expect from an investment perspective. And we thought it would be interesting this cycle to ask some of our alumni to participate in a panel discussion. And so what I've got, or the folks I've got up here are Ralph Ewig from Audacy, Luke Joseph from iFirst Medical Technologies, Elliot Kreitenberg from GermFalcon, and Giovanni Minelli from the Naval Postgraduate School. And it's like, Naval Postgraduate School innovation, I don't get it. We'll talk about that more in a minute, right? But first, I thought we'd get everybody to introduce themselves, give a couple minutes on sort of who they are, their company, and the sort of the experience they've had since they participated in NASA iTech, and the period in which they participated in NASA iTech, because some folks it was 2-3 years ago, some folks it was more recently than that. So with that, I think we're going to bring up Ralph's slides.
All right, well, hello everyone. I did bring a couple of charts just for the introduction. That was my last chart. You gave the punchline away. All right, I am Ralph Ewig, Audacy's founder and CEO. Audacy is trying to build the first real-time, always-on communications network for other objects in space. For the NASA crowd, we're essentially a commercial analog to NASA TDRS, if you're familiar with that system. We've had an interesting history. I have on the next chart a quick summary of it. We started in 2015 at Stanford with 3 guys. In 2016, we designed the architecture and applied for a spectrum license, which is a key component to running this business. 17, we hit our stride. We opened a second office in Singapore. The team grew, and we were participants in the NASA iTech Forum as a finalist, which was great. And then 18, we really took off. We've received the grant of our spectrum license, which was a huge accomplishment. Our customer pipeline exploded as a result of that. You can see that in the graph here. And we rolled out our first ground stations. However, that license also came with a requirement to post a performance bond with the Federal Communications Commission for several millions of dollars. And none of our existing investors was willing to bankroll that. So we took on some debt money to get past that hurdle. And then in December last year, we launched our first demo satellite. We were scheduled for that launch for several years. We knew we were not ready, but we also knew we didn't have enough money to wait and try at a later time. So we rolled the dice. And it came up snake eyes. We lost the satellite. We never acquired signal on it, and then with that, truly ran out of money, did not receive new funding, started laying off the team in January of this year, and had some volunteers left. And then in the middle of the year came out that renewal date of our spectrum license, which is absolutely critical to our business. And it looked like we were not able to hit that date because it required an additional $500,000. So then in early May, my co-founders threw in the towel. The rest of the team disappeared. We closed both offices, and I found myself as the only last surviving individual still trying to save the company. Now, today, I'm happy to say, we did renew our license. It is secure for another 6 months. And I am, while still the only employee, now again a paid employee. So that was a step in the right direction. So we're slowly starting to turn this around. I now have 3 weeks left to find new money, or we will be in default with our debt lender. But if there's one thing I've learned from all of this is that 3 weeks is a long time, a lot can happen. So, in the words of my favorite anime characters, rejection is okay. Swearing, lots of swearing is okay. Even failing is okay. But the one thing you can never do is give up. So quitting is not okay. So thank you for inviting me. I hope you learn from our mistakes.
I guess it's my turn. I am Luke Joseph. I'm the founder and CEO of iFirst Medical Technologies. And what we've provided here is our iFirst analyzer, which measures blood coagulation over time, and it provides graphical representation, as you can see here, of how long it takes the blood to coagulate, and then how quickly the clot forms, and then what the clot strength is. And this information can be used throughout a hospital Specifically, it's very helpful in trauma cases where you will be performing a blood transfusion, and this gives you vital information on what blood products to give that particular person. In addition, since this is an iPhone that's embedded into our diagnostic device here, it can be used in places like an ambulance. Since we've had iTech, or since we participated in iTech, we have demonstrated that in the back of a moving ambulance and then transmitted that information to our cloud where it could have been viewed at the hospital or anywhere else that might be useful. In addition to blood coagulation, we're also going to have many other cartridges, and that's the first 2 or 3 are going to be blood typing and blood cross-matching, which would also be very useful in trauma environments and triage type situations. So since iTech, which we participated in early 2018, so it's been like a year and a half now, and we are marching forward to get our design finalized and then tested so that we can receive our CE mark. And for those that don't or never heard of a CE mark, it's essentially the equivalent to FDA approval for the European Union. And in addition to that, it's also going to be easy to kind of transition that CE mark into markets in Australia and other places because they kind of rubber stamp the CE mark with their regulatory authority. And then once we get our CE certification, or we submit it to get all of our testing accomplished, we get all of our data. It's a self-certification process, which is a little bit different than FDA approval. And once that's accomplished, then we can launch early next year. So again, next slide here. Yeah, and so currently we're wrapping up our seed round, and we're moving on to our Series A. And we have a lot of work to accomplish with the $10 million that we're raising. After we get our CE mark, the FDA is a lot more rigorous in terms of demonstrating your product's ready for the market. So we have to go through clinical trials, and we're going to include a CLIA waiver in that. And the CLIA waiver is specific to use outside of the laboratory. So with the CLIA waiver, we'll be able to use our diagnostic system throughout the hospital and also outside of the hospital in outpatient centers. And so we have a lot of people to hire. We also want to begin development or further development of our blood typing, cross-matching types of cartridges. Also, our patent expenses are becoming more and more every single day, especially when the provisionals run up and you have to transfer those provisionals into utility patents. We're just going to continue to expand our cloud analytics and also focus on precision medicine. We really see a future with diagnostics kind of being a central hub where AI can be applied and in a variety of applications, and so once you take our diagnostic information, all of us are a little bit different, so we have different backgrounds, different health records, so we can take the diagnostic information and personalize it to that individual. And likewise, we just have to expand our manufacturing to kind of meet the need to distribute thousands of these analyzers, and we're really fortunate. One of the things I want to mention is we were introduced to Canon because we were actually participating at the event at the Canon headquarters, and Canon is now our manufacturing partner for our cartridges, and we're hoping to expand that relationship.
You're jumping to question 3. We're only
sorry
on question
about that.
1. That's okay. Do you have a slide after this?
No, this is it.
All right, this is me. My name is Elliot Kreitenberg. I'm the co-founder and president of Dimer UVC Innovations. This is our cornerstone product here is the GermFalcon for airplanes. We basically understood that hospitals use ultraviolet C lights as a reliable way to disinfect when it's properly applied. And we realized that, without going into too much detail, airlines never disinfect. They have no real good way to do that. There are no rules requiring them to do so, and if there were, it would be very difficult to comply.
So for those of you about to fly home, think about that for the rest of the afternoon.
I'm happy to pass out wipes if you want to come to my hotel. So we basically just took these ultraviolet C lights like hospitals use, and we built this machine that has the form factor of a flight attendant's food and drink cart, and it has these wings that reach out over seats and under overhead bins, and we have the ability to disinfect a 737 in 3 minutes, and that includes bathrooms and galleys and catering areas. And this isn't necessarily a space application. There's nothing too high-tech about it, honestly. It was just a reliable technology that we found a place where it could be applied. And I think we actually applied, we participated in iTech in 2018, I believe. Yeah, early 2018. And we didn't really know how we were going to apply this product for space applications. But we knew that we had something that was working. Obviously, airlines don't have those mandates, so there was no eager demand on their end, although having NASA's support in this project has brought us a long way. And if you want to jump to the next slide, we started working on this, some of you may have seen earlier. This is our germ rover, and it's basically a microgravity drone that would navigate the International Space Station like a Roomba, constantly disinfecting. It's very expensive for NASA to supply these manned space flights with the disinfectants and the chemicals that they need. We have to send those materials up to the space station. They use them and they become waste, and they have to send them back down. They also don't work very well, and it's a very tedious and laborious task for those manned space missions, and that's really not what they're up there for. So this is a really efficient way for them to prevent infection on manned space flights. And since we participated in iTech, it's actually having NASA's kind of vote of confidence has allowed us to pitch investors and pitch customers with NASA behind us, which is really helpful. And this is actually this picture on the slide behind me is really to give you an idea of how big this prototype is, and it's just hung up by fishing line because we don't have the technology in-house to test the zero gravity part of this product.
Next slide.
All right, good afternoon. Giovanni Minelli, Faculty Research Associate at the Naval Postgraduate School. And as Tom mentioned, what's a government research engineer doing on a panel with entrepreneurs, right? We're slow and clumsy, and we can't work, quickly. But it turns out what I wanted to do is convey to you that the entrepreneurial spirit's alive and well in the government as well. So our group participated in iTech in 2017. I think it was the second ever iTech event, and we were at the time the only government group to be participating. And I think, to my understanding, it's still one of the only government groups to have done this. And so Tom asked me to give a little bit of background on what some of the work that I had been doing leading up to iTech and then in the time after iTech. And so what I wanted to do is actually talk about some of my work from NASA Ames Research Center just down the street here. And so fresh out of college, just starting grad school, started interning here at Ames, and we started working on the first NASA Cubesats. And so these are some of the pictures from those first missions that we had flown. At the time, what was interesting was we were getting a lot of pushback from other NASA centers, potentially, or just people that didn't quite understand small satellites. That our primary research topics is small satellites, CubeSats. And they were saying, well, how can you build a disposable satellite or a satellite that might fail? You're not putting in enough mission assurance into these spacecraft. And it turned out it was okay to build a satellite with single string systems, not much redundancy, but you could get missions done very quickly. And so we were launching biological experiments that had you flown them on, for example, crewed missions to the ISS or on the space shuttle, they would have cost a lot more money because you have to train the crew, for example, on how to perform these experiments. What we wanted to do is free up the crew to do other tasks that required humans in the loop. So we built these self-contained laboratories essentially and flew them. And so it turns out NASA found a niche for the small sat that actually was a great return on investment. And so there are a lot of different firsts that we got to be involved with. You know, aside from just the first NASA Cubesat, we also performed PI-led experiments, principal investigator-led experiments. We also got to participate in the USA's first solar sail. And that alone has been an area of research that has really taken off in the last several years. But those were really great times and, you know, helped pave the way, I would say, within the government and certainly in the private sector as well. Say, look, small satellites have a unique role and there's a lot of things we can do with them. It turns out we can do really useful things with these small sats. So if you go to the next slide, during my time at the Naval Postgraduate School, what we started realizing was that every government group would go out and build a small sat bus, they'd build a small sat payload, and they'd build the ground station to go with it. And when you'd go to these conferences and places where we'd all share ideas, it turns out they all kind of looked the same, but they weren't intercompatible at all. And so one of the projects that, this has been my baby the last several years, is the Mobile Cubesat Command and Control Network, MC3. And that is born of this idea of that, look, if all our ground stations are going to look the same, we might as well make them operate interchangeably and contribute to a larger community so that when you launch a small sat and you want to do your research, you can leverage the work that we have all already done and get that much more data down from your spacecraft. So we have a network of currently 8 ground stations all around the United States. The partners they vary from military institutions, academic institutions, universities, and contractors that have some sort of ties to government small sat research. So it's a large community of users, and we all try to pool together on the same equipment, same frequencies, same radio licensing, it turns out, because the licensing alone can be a huge hurdle for folks to get in. So if they can jump on our license, that might take an order of months as opposed to potentially years. And on a mission that might only take 6 months to fly, a 2-year life cycle on just paperwork is unacceptable. So we leverage a lot of software-defined radios. These are low-cost ground stations, so we treat them as if they're the CubeSats of the ground segment world, if you will. We've serviced a lot of different satellites with this network, and what's really neat is because we're at the Naval Postgraduate School at NPS, we use this network and the satellites they operate as a research test bed. So we have military students that come through that we train as part of thesis work, as part of their degree programs, part of their master's degree programs. And they get to fly real satellites with real ground stations. But that also lets us then test new ideas that are nationally relevant, that are relevant to government sponsors. And so one of those things was my PhD topic, which is a way of applying optimization algorithms to autonomously operating large constellations of CubeSats. In the years since the first NASA CubeSats, we've now gotten good at launching these, and we're about to launch a lot of them. But we don't necessarily have the budgets to operate large constellations of satellites without automation. And so that's really what this network has become a test bed for. That's what we presented at iTech a couple of years ago, and we got great feedback on it. And so I think the last slide that I wanted to show was a quick video of the algorithm in action. And let's see, hopefully the video loads. But I'll just keep talking while we're doing that. And
Save me from myself.
it's okay. And so what we're trying to do is basically, okay, here we go. So what we have here are 3 satellites flying over our Hawaii ground station. And you see here 2 antennas moving, and this is kind of a time-lapse, fast, it's an accelerated video here. But all we did is we told the system, look, here are the orbital parameters of these satellites. They can be completely different spacecraft. You tell us how long to communicate with each one and for how long, and what are the antenna trajectories to do so, what are the parameters for the software-defined radios. And so this system went through, tracked 1 satellite, reconfigured itself, tracked the 2nd satellite, reconfigured itself, tracked the 3rd satellite, and we didn't have anything to say other than we want you to operate on these 3 satellites. And the algorithm's scalable to however many satellites and however many ground stations you want. So what was very neat was going through the iTech process, because for me this was a PhD research topic, and I'm trying to solve a problem that might be 10 years out. But what this event led me to do was to containerize the problem into essentially a product. Well, okay, if we had to spin this off into a company, what would it look like? What is your product? And the feedback I got, especially from the roundtable discussions, was, I would say, priceless. It helped me formulate the research topic, and it helped me ultimately, leading up to the defense, and now after the defense, we're able to actually have a turnkey solution that we can present to potential sponsors. So it's just like entrepreneurship when you're trying to beat the bushes for venture capital money. The same thing goes for government research, because we are, in fact, in a disruptive field where it's not guaranteed that you're going to succeed. But we have, I think, a very cool thing that we've been working on, and it was through iTech, I think, that we got that great feedback that helped us really get over the hump from just pure research to applied solutions.
I think we call that entrepreneurship, I think,
Yeah.
when you're inside the organization. So, Robin, if you can bring up back the slide with the folks' faces on it. So one of the questions, or one of the things that I've experienced, and I want to pulse you guys on this, is that, just statistically in any population, only about 2% of the people are entrepreneurial or disruptive, right? I want to do something different. I want to change the way we've done it. We've seen a lot of that this week. But when 2% of the population thinks a certain way, that means 98% of the population doesn't think that way. And that's really tough if 98 out of every 100 people you meet think you're crazy. Why are you paying payroll on your credit card? Why are you working 80 hours when you could work 40 hours? These are the things that, like, entrepreneurs hear. So I think personally that it's really important to do what I call find your tribe, which is the other entrepreneurs around you that can sort of validate that you're not crazy, right? So can you speak, and we'll just go down the line like we just did for just a minute or two, about what you've done socially from a self-defense standpoint so that everybody around you doesn't think you're crazy? Ralph?
There's an underlying assumption here that entrepreneurs have a social life. I don't know if that's true.
While we're working 80 hours a week, right?
I'm kidding, right? It's a really interesting point, actually. And I think for me, the most helpful support, morally supported, was really not necessarily people I meet in real life, but finding other individuals, even in history, who are inspiring to me because they pursued something for a reason that was not the average person's motivation. To give you a good example, I've recently read a book called Failure is Not an Option by Gene Kranz. He was one of the most famous mission control operators on the Apollo program and earlier before in Gemini and Mercury. And just reading through that and witnessing secondhand the passion these people had for accomplishing what they did accomplish, regardless of cost, time, personal hardship, that is my tribe. Those are the people I identify with, and that reassures me that as crazy and driven and relentless as I am, there's other people like me out there in the world, and they have succeeded in doing what they do, and that encourages me to keep pushing forward too.
Mo?
Yeah, so any germaphobes out there? Okay, so my tribe. But it's interesting when you, as an entrepreneur, when you found what you think is a solution to a problem that people have somewhat given up on solving or have taken so many other approaches. And so when you look at iTech and you look to the other people who kind of take these long paths to solve problems that some people have stopped considering problems just because you've come to terms with it. It's important to be able to articulate exactly what it is that you want to solve and how you want to solve it. And I think that's part of the struggle of entrepreneurship, and sometimes it's a lot of rejection, and you got to learn to deal with it. And when you work with groups like iTech, it really puts you on a platform like this where you can meet potentially like-minded people or people who are willing to push back, and it gives you an opportunity to test your own theories. And I think that that's part of every entrepreneur's journey to where they're trying to get.
Luke?
Yeah, I think this has been said many times before that, if you surround yourself with successful and smart people, then that definitely helps you. And I firmly believe that. Our company has been very fortunate to have, great investors that are not only investing financially, but in time and mentoring me and, showing me the ropes. And I think once you're kind of in these kinds of circles, they also introduce you to other very successful people, and you kind of absorb it through osmosis, so to speak. And it's I think attending events like NASA iTech, I think that was one of the first times I kind of felt that osmosis of being around similar like-minded people that were smart and driven, and that does definitely charge your battery and keep you going. Recently, we also went to the Global Entrepreneurship Summit, which is another way, that you can engage with entrepreneurs, investors, leaders in industries around the world, and I think that also, the exposure to chief scientists and people of that caliber at NASA. When they can validate what you're doing and evaluate what you're doing and say good things, say bad things, but you're getting the feedback that you're on the right path. It's a similar thing when you hear somebody who's like leading Philips Health at a global scale, resonating with your vision of the future of healthcare or something like that. So I think that's all kind of part of it, but that's what keeps my battery charged in that.
And then Gio, you sort of are inside a really super big organization on some level, right? So how do you sort of stay popular in the face of telling people they got to do something different?
I found actually one of the biggest tricks to succeeding has been in managing expectations. So in our world, we launch spacecraft that may work for 6 months, may work for 5 years, or they might not work at all. And if we don't meet all our mission objectives, how do you convey to folks that might have not been through this process before that it's okay? We've learned a lot. From launch day to now, we learned a lot. That next satellite we build is going to be that much better. And I have to say, I've been on the bad end of these missions where we just never hear from the spacecraft, right? What Ralph was talking about. That's a brutal place to be. But how do you turn that into a learning experience? Everyone wants success. And when we get it, everyone hears about it, and success has a lot of friends. It's those failed missions that I think really test your resolve on why it is you get out of bed every day and you get there to work and you do what you do. For us, it's lowering the barrier to entry to space. That's a pretty big deal, and for me, it's whatever it is inside of you that keeps you going. I think that's. Because in the end, it's hard to explain that, I think, to folks who might not be in this, to not like-minded individuals. They might go, well, that was a waste. Well, that didn't work. It's like, yeah, but we learned a ton, So I think for me, it's find that thing inside of you that keeps driving you, and people over time will actually understand why it is that you do what you do and why you keep pressing on.
Thank you. So for all of us, I think Ralph, you're sort of incentivized to be raising money right now. Mo, I think that you're raising. Luke, I think you're raising. Gio, all of you probably at one point or another said, I just want to put my rocket up. I just want to disinfect aircraft. I just want to save lives. But you find as the head of your organization or the person with the vision for your organization, the responsibility, in addition to launching your rocket or doing whatever your activity happens to be, you also got to go raise capital and sell the idea to other people who can fund that vision. And that in itself sometimes becomes its own thing, right? Where you're like, I would really like to get just back to raising or to running my business, but I'm like in the money chase all the time. So how do you balance those two things, and how do you find sort of the right balance between how much time you spend managing the business and how much time you spend raising money and raising capital and sort of selling the idea of the vision?
That's an interesting challenge. I think every leader is faced with that duality of managing the team, managing inwards, and managing the company to the outside world, managing outwards, and how do you split your time between them. I think for me, it's been a gradual evolving process. I started as an engineer, PhD in aerospace engineering. I've worked as a project lead, and then a team lead, and then a manager for multiple sites as an executive. And I had to transition from this understanding that while initially I personally was able to do pretty much anything from the very beginning to the end of a spacecraft's life cycle, there came a time when it's just not physically possible to do that. So then I have to manage other people to do it collectively. That was a whole new skill set. And then at the next stage up, it was like, how do I manage people that manage people who do that collectively? That was a whole new different skill set again. And then now that I've become an entrepreneur a couple of years back and really tried to fundraise, that was an entirely new world. And it's been a steep learning curve, but I'm learning. And I think overall, the overarching lesson I've taken away from all of this is recognize your own weaknesses, your own shortcomings. We all have them. And shore yourself up with a team that fills in those dead spots. So if I'm not the world's best fundraiser, I better have a person on my team who can do that, is really good at it and enjoys doing it. If I'm maybe not the best accountant in the world, I should probably get a good CFO who takes care of the finances of the company. So whatever you feel that you have a shortfall in, find people to have like-minded individuals that support you, but learn what they know so you become better yourself over time as well.
I think that one of the important parts about finding this balance is having the ability to multitask, because you always have to be, I mean, you're chasing potential investors, and you're also product development, marketing, and all the other things that have to go into it, lobbying in my case. And one of the other things that I think is crucially important for when you're starting a business, especially in the early days, is always be pitching. Just pitch everybody. Because you get better. The more you pitch, the better you get at it. And even people that you know are not relevant, are not frequent flyers even. But people who, just so you have the ability to answer questions that may come your way, because you're gonna get questions that you're not expecting. And I'd say the third thing is never shy away from an opportunity. Even a situation like this, NASA iTech is an awesome program, and they've gotten us involved with the Global Entrepreneurship Summit that Luke was just talking about, and every opportunity that you get as an entrepreneur, you don't know what's going to come from it. So it's important to take every opportunity that is presented and basically take the punches as they come, because you'll be better at taking them next time.
Yeah, I think the balance for me is just priority driven. So it's not necessarily something that's in your control. Obviously, after you have a round and then you're funded, you don't necessarily have to be raising funds after you've got that round. So likewise, if you're going through a big technology push, whether it be software, hardware, or maybe even gaining clinical data, that's not the right time to be raising money. So I think that's always been not so much a balance. It's always been something that's just a very high priority, and then fundraising happens when you're not putting out a fire or you don't have something huge, a big trial at a hospital or a big manufacturing thing to fix.
I think for me, one of the hard. So when I first started on the ground station network on the MC3s, it was a couple of us. It was a box full of parts, and it was kind of this glimmer in our eye that said, "Okay, well, we're going to try to do this." And so it wasn't quite like starting a company, but it was, well, let's get this program going within the government. And over the last several years, as I mentioned, we had our fits and starts, successes and failures. One of the biggest problems for me right now has been letting go, actually. So up until not too long ago, it was myself and a few others doing everything. If we had to stay up all night, we'd get it done. We'd write the code. We'd fly the satellite. We'd go ask for money or whatever.
That sounds a lot like a startup.
Exactly. Except the difference is no one's going to buy us out, right? So, but we believe in the work we do, right? And right now, the hardest challenge for me is letting go. If something breaks or doesn't go right, as it always does, I'm really tempted to jump in and try to fix it. Except now it's like, no, hands off. Let your team figure it out. You need to be out there trying to get either more funding or publishing or keeping the ball moving forward with all the different programs that are going to start using it. So as the engineer, I want to go out and fix it and write the code and build the circuit and turn wrenches. But now it's more administrivia, as my boss calls it. You have to get good at that.
So in every one of your instances, whether it's the FCC or the FAA or the FDA, you guys are all in industries that for one reason or another are heavily regulated. How do you deal with legal expenses, but also how do you deal with the relationships with your regulators and try and win them to your side and win approval? What's your what's your experience been working with various regulators and folks that have the ability to influence regulators?
Yeah, regulations are fun. They really are. No, I mean, they can work in your favor. In many ways, our success with licensing the spectrum that we required to run the business was a great competitive advantage to anybody else who was then trying to do the same thing. I think my biggest takeaway there is that even when you deal with the quote-unquote government, you're still dealing with people. And it's people that matter, and it's the relationships you build with them that matter. You'll never walk into a room, meet a person for the first time and say, "Hey, I'm Ralph, I need $1 million, would you write me a check?" Doesn't happen, no matter what people tell you. You have to get to know individuals, you have to understand what motivates them, and you have to build relationships with them before they're willing to support you. And the same thing applied very much in our interactions with the government as well. So we actually built really solid relationships with individuals that work at the Federal Communications Commission. And they've been very supportive of our goals. They still work within the rule set that they're bound to, but within that have certainly been very supportive. And the same holds true for our legal counsel. I think at our peak, we had 7 different law firms on retainer. That's what it took. One for work visas, one for export control, one for regulatory framework with the FCC, one for corporate law, you name it. But each one of these, again, came down to people. If you have the right partner, I had one of our counsels, the Spectrum Council actually, at one point offered to pay our filing fee with the FCC on his personal credit card because he knew we were short on cash and he that much believed in what we are doing. That's the kind of people you want to align yourself with. And at that point, it doesn't hurt so much anymore if they bill you $1,000 an hour once they're actually able to pay them. So that's
no, that still hurts, but Mo?
I'm lucky that my founding team had some experience with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. We've been able to bring on some in-house counsel as well as some scientific ad board expertise. without having to pay anything up front, which is nice. It's kind of finding those people who you can articulate what you are trying to accomplish to, and who can buy in a way that it's not going to cost anybody anything up front. We're all seeing the bigger picture, and everyone will be made whole at the end. As far as regulations in the space that we're trying to work in, it's tough. It's more of a lack of regulations, which is making it difficult, because in my specific circumstance, most of the places that I know of in this country, for sure, any place where you prepare and serve food, there are sanitation and hygiene standards, and there are baselines that you have to comply with the exception of commercial airplanes. It's the one place I know of in the country where they can prepare and serve food commercially, and no hygiene regulations exist. So getting those regulations passed is I'm not going to say it's not fun. It's sort of fun. But meeting with policymakers and articulating to them exactly what the current situation is, and why, and how it can change, how it could and should change, and why, has been something that is it's a challenge, no doubt. And you guys may or may not know that these policymakers don't move so fast. And entrepreneurs like us, we got to be pretty nimble. So there's sort of some friction there, but it's definitely helped working with iTech and working with legislators and attorneys and all the other things that go into the startup life. It's important to find the people that can be like-minded and get on the same page. And when I go to DC, one of my lines is, "There's germs on both sides of the aisle." So everybody wants to go on vacation and get there healthy and safe, go to work, go on their work trip and get there safe and be able to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish when they get there.
Yeah, it's for us, it's really interesting because it's almost, when you have like a global plan to distribute your product, you're almost like a global explorer where you're navigating in everywhere you go. It's different, and you need a guide to go into these certain waters. And in some cases, like with ours, where we're using a device such as an iPhone that isn't traditionally used for diagnostics, they don't necessarily even know how to interpret it. So in terms of a regulatory category, so it's really important to talk to people. Like in our case, we have FDA advisors, we have our CE advisors, we have advisors in Japan that are helping us understand how to navigate through that regulatory obstacle course, because it's different everywhere in the world. And that's one of the reasons we're going with our CE mark first, because that's essentially the less difficult obstacle course to pursue to get our first product to the market. But I do believe that having, especially when you're thinking about a global kind of thing, or globalizing your product, that it's very important to understand the different regulatory obstacles that you're going to face as early as you can, because it can actually end up feeding back into how your product is packaged and what some of those features may or may not be. Because essentially the more features that your product has, the more areas, like ours is a full-blown radio in terms of every type of radio that's on an iPhone has can be tested. So it's every one of those categories is something that has regulations. So I'd just encourage everybody to try and understand the countries and the markets that you're interested in, and have an understanding as early as possible about what those obstacles might be.
I just want to add something real quick. I think it's really important to understand the legislation and the rules and the things that you're trying to do. But as an entrepreneur, a lot of the time you just got to build it and build something and get it out there and then figure it out.
So I think you're starting to get the idea that radio spectrum licensing is hard to do. So I'll tell another spectrum licensing story here, because those are most of the regulations that we have to deal with. And, you know, because we're dealing with satellite communications for the government, and that's a hard niche to break into. And recently, though, we were able to start participating with the other spectrum coordinators from around the US government. And it's pretty neat because we meet folks that manage the spectrum for the space station. They're very busy. There's a lot of radios on there. NOAA's weather satellites, those are downlinks that cannot be interrupted in any way, right? We rely on those downlinks, right? So that's spectrum that's not touchable. And then all of a sudden, way down here in the corner, there are these Cubesat folks that want to talk to hundreds of Cubesats. Well, we can't let them in, right? Well, it turns out they actually want to work with us. And so we're now part of that conversation. Part of what I've learned is, and this might be, I don't know how this might apply in the private sector, but at least on the government side, we've gotten to know these regulators by going to these meetings, and we start understanding what their challenges are. It's not that they don't want you to succeed. They want you to succeed because what we're working on is nationally relevant and it's useful. What they don't want to do is give up the piece of the spectrum that they have. So it's in working with, I would say, the regulators and understanding what their challenges are, we've been able to find slivers in there where we can operate, or we could say, you know, on a non-interference basis, or you know what, we'll take the hit, we'll take the interference, and we'll operate, we'll take a certain piece of the spectrum. But I found to break into these large established communities, understanding who you're working with and understanding their challenges has been the most useful.
So there has to be the shameless plug question. Since NASA iTech, has there been one thing you point to where there was a benefit of having participated?
This is going to sound dumb, but two things that came out of iTech were actually really beneficial to us. One was the certificate you guys gave us. We hung that up in our office. I still have it hanging over my desk now. And we were in co-working spaces for a good part of our life cycle, and people see that, and they come in and they ask us about it. And we had some really good conversations as a result. Just someone just walking in, it's like, hey, what is that? That's cool. It says NASA on it. That's interesting. And the other one was the photograph you guys took of the acting CTO of NASA handing me that award. That was in our pitch deck forever, and worked wonders every single time. So both of these were extremely valuable to us. So it's really brand recognition we had a lot of mileage out of. And then, of course, the community around NASA iTech and being able to reach out to people of like-minded individuals who will tell you, no, you are not insane for doing this. And that's totally a benefit too.
Well,
so I think just being in the room with people that are so much smarter than we are is such a cool opportunity, because, I mean, we don't have rocket scientists on our team. I think I was one of the tallest guys at my pitch competition, but I definitely wasn't one of the smartest. But I think that iTech has really given us that legitimacy in the sense that everyone has a pretty good amount of respect for NASA and what they're able to do, and the fact that they're reaching out to the private sector and looking for the best ideas is a great opportunity, and they've put us in positions to reach out to investors who would not have called us back prior to iTech. And again, we have the NASA iTech Award sitting in, I guess, the garage, but but we tell people about it all the time, and everyone knows NASA, and everybody is very impressed by the NASA part of it. The State Department invited us to a Global Entrepreneurship Summit where we met dozens of awesome investor prospects, and all of them have the connections that we need, not only in the commercial airline sector, but also in health and aerospace. It's put us in contact with the rocket scientists that we need to do this microgravity autonomous drone project that we're working on, and none of it could have been done without the NASA iTech program. How's that a plug?
yeah, thank you.
Good plug.
Yeah. Luke?
Yeah, I think like everybody else has said, and somebody said it yesterday, I think one of the speakers said that, the brand recognition of NASA is unparalleled, and it really is. And I also saw in like The Hague and Holland, people walking around with NASA t-shirts on, and so when you have the NASA logo and that NASA affiliation with your technology, and they know that it's been vetted, by the leading scientists in the world, then that goes far. That goes far. I think the other thing is just the continuing networking, because not only the network that was established here at NASA iTech, but that was just extended just by like the GES conference is that same thing on steroids, where you just I'm still following up with people from GES, and I think finally the other thing was that we found a partnership with Canon with manufacturing, and I'm hoping that continues to flourish, and we can have them manufacturing more and more of our product. That way we can bring everything into the United States, and have also that affiliation with Canon goes a long way, because if you say, okay, well, Canon's our manufacturing partner, and they're the ones that are handling our manufacturing, that also goes a long way.
Well, from my point of view, iTech served as the first public, really, presentation of the research that I was doing concerning the ground network. So that was the automation piece that I mentioned in the beginning there. And so it was a bit of a forcing function to think about, okay, well, this isn't just research, it's a product. If you had to turn this into a company, what would it look like? And so we went through the patenting process. We filed for a patent. We also getting FaceTime, I think, in the roundtables with the chief engineers from the various NASA centers was hugely valuable, because you got to hear about what some of their challenges are from each center's point of view, and then also from the venture capital point of view. We were getting phone calls actually for quite some time after that, asking us, hey, do you want to spin off your own company? Because we think you got something here. Why don't you?
We're still hopeful you will. The whole point here is to create businesses. But,
Exactly. Well, and so from my point of view, I treat it as, it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to leave what I'm doing just yet. However, it's very encouraging, and I'm going to treat it like a startup within the government. And I think that part has served me very well. And what happened was, in presenting the 15-minute pitch deck, for example, that we had to do with iTech, it made me condense down what that elevator pitch is. So when you're talking to potential sponsors, you can convey that message very quickly. And before then, I was stumbling. I couldn't get the message across. So I'm forever grateful for the iTech folks to take a chance on us and give us that forum.
So we're running down here to the last question, I think, and this is really, I think, the heart of it for the entrepreneurs that are 2 and in some years 3 years behind you guys in the process. And that is, what's one thing that you wish you knew 2 or 3 years ago that you know today, that if somebody could have come to you 2 or 3 years ago and said, hey, you should know this, be aware of this, this will be really helpful. What's one thing that you'd sort of pass on to the folks that are behind you and say, hey, be aware of this? Ralph?
That's really hard. There are many things I know today which I didn't know 2 years ago, which were very helpful. Trying to pick one specific one is tricky. I think one of the biggest insights probably was, as we were getting into this and starting to build a company and going through an accelerator at Stanford University, actually, we were pushed a lot on what's called product market fit. Make sure that your customer really wants what you're selling, understand what their problems are, et cetera, et cetera. And you've all heard this. I think the big insight that I did not have at the time, which I understand now, is that there is also product market fit for your company and the investor community. Not every investor is going to be a suitable investor for you based on the product, your company, and the parameters around that. So work at product market fit as an investment opportunity to a very specific target audience just as hard as you would work on product market fit for your customers. And that is a huge lesson that took us a long time to pick up on. And in the process, collecting a lot of rejection, which counted against us until we overcame it. So I think that's something I wish somebody had told me before going out talking to 200 investors and figuring it out on my own.
I think my advice to an entrepreneur 2 to 3 years behind us, I would say would be become an expert as much as you can on what you're talking about, and be prepared to be challenged on everything. Also prepare for rejection and learn to love it. You got to be willing to put yourself out there, and basically you have to be comfortable enough with the materials that you're willing to spill it all out, and somebody might totally not get it. And you got to understand when they're wrong, but you also got to understand when you're wrong, and figure out why you're wrong, and figure out how to make yourself, how to adjust with new information. It's really easy to get stuck focusing on the one thing that you're working on, and if it's not there, it's not there, and sometimes it's there and your customers just don't know yet. But it's important to be nimble, it's important to be flexible, and you got to be ready to go 24 hours a day, I'd say.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting because when I first founded the company and I was talking to one of my early advisors, and I don't think at that time I'd pitched once, and he says, you're going to have to pitch at least 100 times before you get your first dime. And I was like thinking, man, this guy is crazy. There's no way it's going to take 100 times before I start to raise money.
How many did it end up being?
At least 100, maybe more. But I think my point is with that is that don't be discouraged in raising money, and because a lot of times when somebody turns you down, even if you're everything's looking like you're going to get funded, and then something happens and it doesn't work out, it's for the best. Because I think like in our case, it's taken a while to get the investors that we have, but the investors that we have are awesome. And the other thing is, you don't want investors that are only giving you financial support. You want investors that are also going to be able to mentor you, or be, potentially a manufacturing partner, or going to potentially be a distribution partner. So look for something more, a larger contribution than just finances. And don't be discouraged, and just keep your nose to the grindstone, and just try and always be on the path of raising money. Even if you're not in a round where you're actually raising money, be thinking in the back of your head about what that next round is going to be, what those milestones are going to be, and how you're going to accomplish them with that funding.
I think if you go on a really long hike or a long run, or whatever analogy you'd like to use there, it all comes down to putting one foot in front of the other for long periods of time. And sometimes it's easy to put one foot in front, and sometimes it's not. But I think as long as you keep moving forward, you'll look back, let's say on those 3 years later, and you'll say, wow, I came a really long way. And one of the ways of doing that I found has been to seek continual improvement. And that's either self-improvement or improvement with your product. So either you go out and you try to learn something new, try to become the expert, and every day you might learn something small and insignificant, but you've learned something. Or with the thing that you're trying to develop, you might find something that's not quite sufficient and it's not quite working the way you want. Address it, and address it aggressively. And even if it's a small change, that one day, the next day you'll show up and that system will be that much better. And I think over time, over those years that you keep doing that, you'll look back and you say, wow, we've really come a long way, because we've made these small incremental changes every day.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us today at NASA iTech 2019, Cycle 1.
Thank you.
Thank you.